Have you ever imagined stumbling upon a secret tunnel beneath a centuries-old barn that holds inventions capable of changing national history? That's exactly what happens in this remarkable saga. Our unassuming ranch hand finds an intricately carved trapdoor, and beneath it, a hidden chamber filled with mysterious technology, forgotten diaries, and a treasure trove of clues that defy everything we thought we knew. Each new step plunges him deeper into a world of covert inventions and secret experiments that could reshape our understanding of the past. Curious to know what these artifacts reveal about a hidden chapter of American innovation? Stick around to hear the complete story and trust us. The ending will leave you speechless. Be sure to subscribe to our channel right now to support us and stay updated on more unbelievable stories just like this one. Miguel Ortiz had risen before the sun for nearly 40 years. Long enough for the first quiet pink of dawn to become his most cherished companion. At 67, he was a fixture at the Golden Prairie Ranch, a place tucked deep into the rolling grasslands of South Dakota. He stood at the threshold of another day's work, one made more difficult by his constant companion and ache in his knees that felt like a ticking clock, reminding him he was not young. Time and weather had branded themselves on his face, carving lines of experience that told of countless storms, weathered and unspoken worries endured. Yet there was a gentle dignity to Miguel, visible in the way he patted the flanks of the ranch's old horses and murmured comforting words to them, as if they were old friends who understood him best. He lived alone in a battered trailer near the ranch's north fence line, a short walk from the main barns. That trailer had once been a source of personal pride. Back when it was new and shiny, now paint peeled from its sides, and the windows rattled at the faintest gust of prairie wind. Despite its tattered appearance, it was the only place that felt like home. The ranch itself was owned by the Hewitt family, whose patriarch, Franklin Hewitt, was the fifth generation to oversee this expanse of land. In many ways, Miguel had outlasted even Franklin's father, still staying on well past an age when most would retire to a softer routine. Yet the man had no illusions. He was no wealthy ranch baron. He had no nest egg to cushion him, and he carried the persistent worry that his work-worn body might soon fail him in a way that would leave him destitute. Although Golden Prairie Ranch now sprawled over 20,000 acres, it had begun as a much smaller venture in the late 1800s when a German immigrant named Friedrich Neumann first broke ground. The original barn had somehow survived while more modern steel structures rose around it, effectively turning the old barn into a historic centerpiece. Over the decades, visitors would comment on the unusual depth of its foundation or the intricate carvings along the main beam's remnants of Neumann's European craftsmanship. Local legends whispered that the old barn held secrets, but nobody took such rumors seriously, least of all Miguel, who had spent countless hours inside, tending livestock or seeking shelter from icy winter gales. If there had been a grand secret, he figured he would have stumbled upon it by now. Despite his stoicism, Miguel felt a growing anxiety building inside him like a prairie thunderhead. He had recently learned his arthritis treatments would no longer be covered under the ranch's changing insurance policy. The pills he needed were getting more expensive, and his wages, though Franklin tried to be generous, barely stretched to cover rent, groceries, and medication. At night, he would lie awake, sometimes staring through his trailer's small window at the stars, wondering if he would eventually be forced to leave the only home he had known since his 20s. Was this how it would all end, a lifetime of labor, culminating in uncertainty and pain? On a brisk morning in late August, he mustered the determination to continue his chores, shovel in hand, intending to muck out the eastern stalls of the old Newman barn. The sun was still hidden behind the horizon, and the meadowlarks were silent in the pre-dawn hush. That was the day the thread of fate pulled taut. Miguel, rubbing his aching knees, stepped into the barn for what he assumed would be another routine day. Little did he know, the largest revelation of his life, and perhaps the entire ranch's history, waited just beneath his feet. The dawn's early glow filtered through the barn's warped wooden slats, illuminating dust motes dancing in the shafts of light. Despite its age, the structure carried an air of timeless sturdiness. Heavy oak beams formed an elaborate framework overhead, complete with complex joinery that looked more like cathedral rafters than something intended for horses and hay bales. Miguel had always thought of the craftsmanship as a mere quirk of old-world artisanship, Friedrich Neumann's tribute to the European barn-building methods of his homeland. Now, as he walked the length of the barn to the far corner, water dripped from last night's rainstorm, forming small puddles along the floor. The ranch had experienced a heavy downpour, and Miguel anticipated a muddy, unpleasant chore ahead. His knees hissed in protest as he lowered himself to scrape soiled straw into a wheelbarrow. The friction of the pitchfork against the damp ground made a muted scraping noise, and he paused when he noticed something odd about the puddle forming underfoot. The water gathered into a circular pattern that seemed to vanish into a slight depression in the dirt. It was as if a small sinkhole was forming, pulling water toward it. With a mixture of irritation and curiosity, Miguel poked the spot with the handle of his pitchfork. Instead of resistance, he felt a hollow echo, almost metallic, resonating up the wooden shaft. Immediately, he thought it might be a rotted floorboard, or perhaps some old hardware left behind decades ago. But there were no planks in this section of the barn, just hard-packed dirt that had been trod upon by generations of hooves and boots. A trace of unease trickled through him, like cold water down his spine. He tapped the ground again, more firmly. The echo persisted, a sound that did not belong under layers of earth. After years of routine, Miguel's senses were honed to the barn's every quirk and creak, and this was unquestionably out of the ordinary. Could there be a buried storage space, a sealed well? He'd heard stories of contraband hidden during Prohibition or valuables stashed away during the Depression. Gently, he shifted the soaked straw and began scraping away the top layer of dirt with the corner of his shovel. Each scoop revealed more irregularities in the soil. It looked packed at first, but quickly gave way to reveal a dense wooden surface underneath. Droplets from the barn roof dripped onto the exposed wood, and in that muted light, Miguel could make out carved designs. There was a swirl of oak leaves, reminiscent of European folk patterns, and an acorn motif repeated along the grain. The fact that it was in such good condition, presumably sealed away from the elements, made it all the more striking. He paused, glancing around to see if any other ranch hands were nearby. No one was. It was still too early, and most of the younger employees wouldn't arrive for another hour. A conflicting swirl of excitement and trepidation welled inside him. Life on the ranch was predictable, mornings spent mucking stalls, afternoons repairing fences, evenings taking care of feeding. This discovery, unexpected and mysterious, broke the routine he had grown so used to. While part of him wanted to report it immediately to Franklin Hewitt, something deeper compelled him to investigate on his own. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the faint hope that discovering something valuable might solve his mounting financial burdens. Setting the shovel aside, Miguel knelt and ran his calloused fingers over the carved wooden surface. They came to rest on a tarnished brass plate at the center, which bore a curious keyhole and more intricate symbols. A wave of intrigue coursed through him. This was no ordinary hatch. It was a hidden door, intentionally concealed. For the first time in ages, Miguel felt a stirring of anticipation, a sense that the mundane reality of his life could be shattered by whatever lay just beyond a well-crafted lock from ages past. Determination filled Miguel's veins as he lugged his shovel and pitchfork back to their usual place, keeping the discovery to himself. He closed the barn doors behind him, his mind racing through possibilities, tales of hidden valuables, old contraband, or maybe just a forgotten root cellar flickered through his imagination. With each new hypothesis, his excitement grew. If he found anything valuable, maybe it could cover his overdue medical bills or grant him the financial security to leave the ranch on his own terms. But there was also a quieter motivation. Miguel had always felt overshadowed by the ranch's grandeur, by the Hewitt family's legacy. Could this be his chance to carve his own mark on a place where he'd spent most of his adult life? Rather than rushing to the main house, he walked a circuitous route back to his trailer, ensuring no one would suspect anything unusual. The other ranch hands were just arriving, greeting him with the casual wave they gave the old guard. A few of the younger ones teased him kindly, telling him he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Miguel forced a soft chuckle. If only they knew. Inside his trailer, he rummaged through drawers and shelves, searching for something, anything that might function as a makeshift key to the curious brass plate he had seen. After several minutes of fruitless searching, he found a collection of old coat hangers, some thin copper wire, and a few small screwdrivers left over from repairing a broken radio ages ago. He recalled how, over the decades, he had picked up the basics of lock and latch mechanics simply by necessity on the ranch gates that jammed, storage sheds with antiquated locks, and so forth. These minor skills never seemed meaningful enough to be proud of, yet here they were, possibly useful for the first time in a truly significant way. His heartbeat quickened with each step back to the barn. Now the sun was fully up, and he worried someone might notice his unusual focus on one particular corner stall. With deliberate calm, he fed the horses and gave water to the ranch dogs, going about his tasks as methodically as possible, until finally, he was alone again in that silent stretch of the barn. He approached the trapdoor, clearing away more of the dirt to expose its edges. The craftsmanship was remarkable. Sturdy wooden beams held the hatch perfectly flush with the ground, making it virtually invisible without close inspection. Miguel set about fashioning a crude pick and tension wrench from his coat hanger and copper wire. His fingers trembled slightly, partly from the arthritis and partly from excitement. In the quiet of the barn, he could hear the rhythmic breathing of a horse in the adjacent stall, a comforting and familiar sound that contrasted sharply with the unknown lying just inches below. He inserted the makeshift tools into the antique lock, expecting the mechanism to be rusted or jammed. Instead, it felt unexpectedly smooth, as if someone had oiled it not too long ago. He carefully jiggled and turned, sweat beading on his forehead. A subtle click echoed beneath him. He held his breath and tried the handle. The door gave a slight shift. With a gentle pull, the trap door lifted, revealing the top of a wooden ladder descending into darkness. A swirl of stale air, tinged with something metallic, rose from below. Miguel blinked, letting his eyes adjust. For a moment, he hesitated. He had unlocked something that might unravel the entire ranch's history, and perhaps his own. The question now was whether he was truly ready to see what lay beneath the barn he had known all his life. Bracing himself, Miguel switched on a small flashlight he'd brought, a cheap plastic one he used mostly for looking under machinery in the maintenance shed. The light beam cut through the gloom, revealing the ladder's rungs leading some 15 feet below ground. The walls were wooden planks, reinforced with what appeared to be carefully fitted stones, an odd blend of rustic frontier style and old-world masonry. He noted the dryness of the air, as if the space had been well sealed from moisture. An undercurrent of mystery threaded through his thoughts, urging him onward. He placed one foot on the ladder, testing its strength. Remarkably, it barely creaked, suggesting it had been built with skill and perhaps preserved by the stable conditions. With each step, his arthritic knees grumbled, but curiosity drove him downward. Halfway down, he paused to catch his breath and let the flashlight sweep around the subterranean chamber. Shapes loomed in the darkness, large objects draped in protective cloth, rows of something that looked like shelving, and a few glints of brass or steel that reflected the flashlight's glare. Upon reaching the bottom, he found himself in a spacious, rectangular room. The ceiling rose high enough that he could stand upright without stooping. The floor was paved with what looked like polished stone slabs. Along the walls were shelves stacked with books, folders, and scrolls. Some were bound in leather so old that the covers had cracked, others wrapped in cloth to protect them from dust. Large wooden crates were scattered about, their lids nailed shut, bearing faded inscriptions in German and occasional English words like instruments or machinery. But most striking of all were several glass display cases arrayed down the center of the room, each containing metal contraptions of baffling design gears, pulleys, wiring, and small dials with inscriptions that Miguel could not decipher. He approached one display case, peering at what looked like a mechanical device reminiscent of an early telegraph machine, but with extra coils and an unusual arrangement of levers. A label inside bore the name Neumann Synchron Apparatus, 1879. Neumann wasn't that the name of the German immigrant who built the original barn. Miguel felt his pulse quicken. All his life, he had known about Friedrich Neumann only through second-hand stories. Some said he was a wealthy dreamer. Others believed him to be a genius out of place. And still others joked he was likely just another eccentric settler. Yet here was a trove of artifacts that suggested something far more elaborate. Stepping carefully, Miguel's flashlight danced across the walls. He saw pinned sketches on corkboards, lines of equations in both German and English, and references to transcontinental communication, power conduction, and classified developments. Reading the words made him feel as though he'd stumbled into a hidden laboratory from a Jules Verne novel rather than a rural American barn. It seemed Neumann had been part of something bigger, a secret project, perhaps that never made it into mainstream historical accounts. A large desk stood in one corner, covered with papers and letters that had yellowed with time. Miguel picked up a sheaf of parchment, scanning the first lines. The text spoke of government correspondences, contracts, and urgent requests for specialized metals. Stamps from official-looking departments, though antiquated, marred the margins. This was more than a dusty relic of someone's personal hobby. It had the air of serious national importance, hidden away in the unlikeliest of places. As he set the papers down, his hands trembled. A swirl of emotions overtook him: awe, excitement, and a gnawing uncertainty about what to do next. After all, knowledge could be power, but it could also be a burden, especially for a man who had spent a lifetime in near invisibility. Returning to the surface was like surfacing from a deep dive into uncharted waters. Miguel felt breathless and disoriented, not from physical exertion, but from the weight of what he had just uncovered. He slid the trapdoor closed behind him, carefully brushing dirt and straw back into place so no one would suspect a thing. The last thing he needed was to draw attention before he fully grasped the implications of his discovery. A part of him wanted to rush straight to Franklin Hewitt, the ranch owner, to reveal everything. But caution prevailed. If this was as significant as it seemed, how would Franklin respond? Would he dismiss Miguel, co-opt the discovery for a quick profit, or inadvertently attract government officials who might seal it all away? The day's usual chores suddenly felt surreal. He tended to the horses, replaced a broken gate latch near the cattle pens, and listened with feigned patience as younger ranch hands griped about their own trivial frustrations. Meanwhile, in his mind's eye, he kept seeing the cryptic symbols, the mechanical devices, and the official seals from a century ago. He wondered if Neumann had been working directly with federal authorities or if this had been some clandestine operation. The presence of old government stamps hinted at top-secret missions, perhaps related to transcontinental communication or early technology programs. If so, why had it been hidden all this time after sunset, when the ranch's main yard grew quiet and the sky stretched wide with stars? Miguel walked the long path from the bunkhouse to the ranch's main residence. The Victorian-style home was lovingly maintained, with a wraparound porch and stained glass windows. Light spilled out in the golden squares, illuminating the lawn. Inside, Franklin Hewitt was at his massive mahogany desk, poring over spreadsheets and budget reports, likely grappling with the ranch's rising costs. He glanced up as Miguel knocked softly, an unspoken question in his eyes. Miguel rarely disturbed him in the evening unless something important had happened, and the older man's expression betrayed a flicker of both concern and curiosity. "How can I help you?" Miguel Franklin asked, removing a pair of reading glasses from the bridge of his nose. Even at this late hour, the man wore a crisp button-up shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He was about 10 years younger than Miguel, but exuded the practiced authority of a boss who had grown up inheriting responsibilities. In the old days, Franklin's father had been the ranch head, but Franklin had taken over a decade ago, implementing all sorts of modernizations: GPS trackers on livestock, automated feeding systems, even drone surveillance to check fence lines. Miguel hesitated, then quietly asked if Franklin could spare a few minutes. In hushed tones, he narrated his discovery of the trapdoor. He omitted no detail: the carved wooden hatch, the hidden chamber, the rows of strange machinery and documents. At first, Franklin listened in skeptical silence, his brow furrowing as if trying to gauge whether Miguel was exaggerating or pulling some kind of prank. But the sincerity in Miguel's voice, combined with the mention of official government documents, quickly dispelled any sense of disbelief. Wordlessly, Franklin rose, grabbed a flashlight, and followed Miguel out into the darkness. They walked in tense silence across the ranch yard, accompanied by the distant sounds of crickets and the rustling of cattle settling down for the night. It was only once they stepped into the barn and Miguel pointed to the disguised corner that Franklin's posture stiffened. And he muttered, "All right, let's see if you're telling the truth." 15 minutes later, both men stood in stunned silence at the bottom of the ladder, the flashlight beams dancing across shelves, crates, and silent machines that had slept beneath the barn for generations. Franklin's typical composure gave way to visible astonishment. He hovered over one of the glass cases, studying what looked like a prototype telegraph device with far more complicated wiring than anything from the official historical timeline. Miguel's light shone on a leather-bound ledger perched on the desk, and he picked it up, flipping the pages to reveal meticulously recorded transactions. There were shipments of metal alloys, small steam engines, and references to something called Project Horizon. Dates ranged from 1875 to 1890, each annotated with signatures or initials. Franklin's hand shook slightly as he ran his fingers over an official-looking seal pressed into one of the documents. "Department of the Interior," he read aloud. "These letters must be from the federal government at the time. This is remarkable. It's like stepping into an alternate history." He set the paper down carefully, as though it might crumble in his grasp. Miguel offered a small, wry smile, equal parts nervousness and pride. "I've worked here 4 decades. Boss, thought I knew every inch of this barn, every squeaky floorboard. Turns out we've been on top of this all along." A wave of emotion washed over him. For so long, he'd felt invisible, overshadowed by younger men in the modern bustle of the ranch. Now, he stood at the center of something that might be historically monumental. "What do you think we should do?" Franklin whispered, as if speaking too loudly might awaken whatever slept in these machines. The question hung in the stale subterranean air for a moment, calling attention to the enormous responsibility they now shared. On one hand, the discovery could be a goldmine tourist revenue, research grants, or even a purchase offer from a tech conglomerate eager to claim a piece of early American innovation. On the other hand, there was a moral responsibility to handle the artifacts properly, to preserve them and ensure they were studied by experts who could place them in the broader context of American history. Not to mention the possibility of overshadowing any rightful claims by Newman's heirs, assuming there were any living descendants somewhere. Miguel glanced around, recalling the lines of text he had read, the official stamps, the advanced mechanical drawings. "I think we need to be careful. This isn't just family memorabilia. It might have national significance." He said, "We also have to consider the local community. Prairieville might not know the treasure hidden right here." He paused, swallowing the dryness in his throat. "I just didn't want to keep it to myself. It didn't feel right." Franklin exhaled, looking every bit like a man who had just discovered a hidden fortune in his backyard. "Let's close this door for tonight," he decided. "We'll take photographs, catalog what we can, then I'll get in touch with a historian or 2 people I trust. We'll figure out the legalities, the historical societies, maybe even the state or federal authorities if it comes to that." With that, the 2 men climbed the ladder back to the barn, relatching the trap door with a silent oath to keep it discreet for the moment. Neither fully grasped the magnitude of the next steps, but both sensed life on the Golden Prairie Ranch had irreversibly changed. The quiet corners of rural life don't often harbor secrets of such scale, and yet, here they were, guardians of an entire hidden legacy that seemed poised to rewrite a slice of American history. A restless night claimed them both. Miguel tossed and turned in his small trailer, replaying the day's events on loop. His joints throbbed when he finally managed to drift off, a dull echo of how the secrets below might be throbbing with consequences. Franklin, likewise, found no solace in the comfortable bed of the main house. He spent the early hours huddled by his computer, composing emails to local historians and discreetly researching anything about Friedrich Neumann's background. By daybreak, the two men convened at the ranch kitchen, each weary from the lack of sleep but fueled by anticipation. Over steaming mugs of coffee, Franklin shared what he'd discovered. Neumann immigrated around 1870, he began, reading from a printout. Apparently, he was well funded for someone arriving at that time. There are records of large land purchases, advanced farming equipment, and shipments from Germany that included precision instruments. But the official record stops abruptly after the early 1880s. No mention of his death, heirs, nothing. It's like he vanished. Miguel nodded, absorbing the information. Part of him felt the ranch was living two lives now. The normal daily hum of feeding livestock, maintaining machinery, chatting with ranch hands, and this undercurrent of a hidden laboratory that might connect to an entire secret story lost to time. So maybe he was working with the government back then. He ventured. This state was still a frontier. After all, Franklin rubbed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. I reached out to Professor Elaine Carter at the South Dakota Institute of History. She's well respected and has done extensive research on 19th century settlers. I sent her a couple of discreet photos of the crates and documents. She nearly jumped out of her skin. She wants to come out here right away with a small team. I asked her to keep it confidential for now. Miguel's heart quickened. The idea of strangers, academics, possibly government officials snooping around the ranch unnerved him. But at least Professor Carter might validate the significance of the find. If they come, we better prepare the place. I don't want a big crowd in that chamber at once. He said, before midday, word began to slip out among the ranch hands that something was going on. Miguel was never one to hide his emotions well, and the younger guys noticed how jumpy he seemed. Even the long-serving cook, Ramona Fletcher, teased him about acting like a cat in a rocking chair factory. Eventually, Franklin decided to gather a few key staff members, those who'd worked at the ranch for decades and could be trusted. He told them about the discovery in carefully chosen words, emphasizing that they were dealing with a potential historical treasure. Surprised gasps and whispers filled the kitchen. Some looked at Miguel with newfound respect, as if he had just revealed a secret identity. One of them, an older mechanic named Clyde, simply shook his head. I always said that barn was built strange. You could drive a locomotive on the second floor and the place wouldn't buckle. I guess now we know why it was so reinforced. The hush of realization fell again, and Franklin asked for everyone's cooperation in keeping the discovery low profile until they had more clarity. Outside, a warm sun bathed the pastures, and the ranch bustled with chores. Yet the mood had shifted. Workers passed each other with intrigued, conspiratorial looks. The Golden Prairie Ranch was no longer just a spot on the map. It was possibly a linchpin in an untold chapter of American innovation. And in the eye of the storm, Miguel Ortiz felt both pride and trepidation. He had unraveled the first layer of a mystery, but he wondered just how many layers might lie beneath, waiting to be revealed and what it might cost him to see it through. Professor Elaine Carter arrived 2 days later with a small entourage, a historian colleague, a graduate student with a camera, and an archivist who specialized in 19th century documents. Seeing their car rumble up the ranch's long gravel driveway struck a new chord of reality. Franklin greeted them in the main house, while Miguel lingered outside, uncertain of the reception he, as the discoverer, might receive. Eventually, Franklin beckoned him inside, introducing him as the man who found the hidden room, tall and wiry with silver-streaked hair. Professor Carter exuded an intellectual's focus, her eyes scanning everything with razor precision. She asked pointed questions about the barn's history, the exact location of the hidden trapdoor, the conditions in which it was found. Miguel answered as best he could, feeling both anxious and oddly gratified by her serious interest. Her colleagues were equally curious, scribbling notes and adjusting their camera equipment. Once the preliminary conversation wrapped, Franklin led them to the barn, instructing any prying ranch hands to keep their distance. As they descended the ladder into the underground chamber, the historian's collective intake of breath was audible. The archivist began snapping photos immediately, focusing on crate inscriptions and the mechanical devices in glass cases. The graduate student busied herself filming every angle, occasionally exclaiming in awe at the complexity of some contraption or the neat rows of documents. Professor Carter ran her fingers lightly over the nearest desk, reading the spidery handwriting on a letter that had clearly once been official correspondence. "I see references to the Department of the Interior," she murmured. "And this here mentions something about communications prototypes. This is extraordinary. It's as if we've stumbled onto a hush-hush frontier research lab. I've never encountered anything quite like it." She looked up, her face shining with excitement. "These are in impeccable condition for their age. The dryness below ground must have created a perfect preservation environment." Miguel watched them work, feeling a subtle twinge of protectiveness. This had been his discovery, his private moment of revelation, and now strangers were itemizing, labeling, and contextualizing every inch of it. He reminded himself that this was necessary, that professional historians could piece together the puzzle in ways he never could. Still, he felt an odd pang of loss, like giving away a precious secret he'd briefly possessed alone. After nearly 3 hours of photographing and note-taking, the group reconvened in the ranch's main dining room. Exhausted yet animated, they discussed preliminary findings over coffee. The archivist, scanning a thick ledger, mentioned seeing references to Project Aurora, which seemed to be a large-scale attempt at laying the groundwork for advanced telegraphy or perhaps even early telephony. Another set of documents made mention of experimental power generators, far beyond the known capabilities of the 1870s. Professor Carter postulated that Newman might have spearheaded a clandestine group of inventors, possibly immigrants, federal officials, and local benefactors who sought to give the United States an unassailable technological edge in the post-Civil War era. If so, the secrecy would have been paramount. Franklin sat quietly through most of the discussion, occasionally rubbing his temples as if trying to absorb the magnitude of it all. Finally, he cleared his throat. "What do we do next?" he asked, scanning each expert's face. The question hung in the air like a pivot point, a reminder that knowledge could alter not just the ranch, but the broader understanding of American history. On the periphery of the conversation, Miguel quietly sighed. He had sparked this seismic shift with a simple morning chore. Now, the wave of discovery threatened to engulf him and everyone else who called Golden Prairie Ranch home. In the days that followed, the presence of Professor Carter's team on the ranch became a guarded secret. They set up a temporary workstation in one of the vacant bunkhouses, scanning documents and painstakingly logging each artifact from the hidden chamber. Word spread. However, as rumors always do, and soon a few local townsfolk from Prairieville caught wind. The town's mayor, Susan Yates, politely asked if she could visit, expressing interest in how such a significant historical find might benefit the community. Franklin, eager to maintain good relations and even better publicity, agreed to a private tour, but he kept it small. Miguel found himself swarmed by questions whenever he ventured into town for groceries or medicine. Strangers recognized him as that guy from the ranch who found something huge, and while many were excited, he also sensed envy or suspicion in a few. Prairieville was a place where news traveled fast, and not everyone appreciated secrets being kept from the broader public. One evening, at the local diner, an older resident cornered Miguel by the salad bar and muttered something about how the government or some big corporation will come snatch it all away, leaving the locals with nothing but tall tales. Miguel feigned a polite smile, but the man's words struck a chord of fear in him. At the ranch, tensions began to surface among the staff. The younger ranch hands, intrigued by the possibility of fame or fortune, wanted to see the chamber. Franklin refused, citing safety and the need for controlled research conditions. Meanwhile, more experienced employees feared that once the find became fully public, the ranch might be sold or overrun with visitors. The day-to-day chores, from feeding animals to repairing fences, still needed doing, but the old sense of routine had fractured. Everyone's mind is on the future, the potential changes, and perhaps money that might accompany the discovery. Professor Carter, sensing the mounting pressure, convened a meeting with Franklin and Miguel. They assembled in Franklin's study, the same dimly lit room where Miguel had first revealed the trapdoor discovery. Carter brought in a series of proposals collaborating with the local museums, applying for grants to develop the site as a historical exhibit, or inviting major universities to sponsor a deeper investigation. Each option had advantages and pitfalls. Funding could help preserve the artifacts properly, but large institutions often brought red tape and external interests that might overshadow local priorities. Miguel listened intently, arms crossed over his chest, feeling slightly overwhelmed. For him, it was never about profit or fame. After all, he had spent 40 years quietly laboring on this land. He only wanted to ensure the hidden legacy of Neumann was not exploited or forgotten. And yes, if possible, to find some relief from his own financial worries that had grown more acute with each passing year. He had even told Franklin about the possibility that if something truly valuable emerged, maybe the ranch could spare a bit to cover his medical costs more generously. Franklin, sympathetic, had nodded, promising they'd work something out. Yet in the swirl of emerging interests, would that promise hold? Meanwhile, every day revealed new details. The archivist discovered references to Friedrich's patron, suggesting Neumann had a wealthy benefactor back in Europe. The graduate student found a series of engineering diagrams labeled experimental wireless, which seemed to predate Marconi's patents by decades. The mechanical devices, once polished free of dust, appeared to be early prototypes for everything from electric generators to advanced measuring instruments. Even Carter admitted she had vastly underestimated the scope of Neumann's efforts. It was as though he had tried to create an entire future, quietly and ahead of schedule, in the hidden basement of a barn on the American frontier. At the heart of all this was a lingering question. Why had it all remained hidden? Surely someone as brilliant and well-connected as Friedrich Neumann would have wanted his name in the annals of innovation. Professor Carter offered a theory that perhaps government interests had forced secrecy to maintain a competitive edge. Another angle posited that personal tragedy, a lost family, a thwarted dream had prompted Neumann to seal away his life's work. Whatever the truth, it was locked in diaries, letters, and mechanical contraptions that had not seen daylight in over a century. Spurred by these riddles, Carter's team redoubled their efforts, translating German documents, cross-referencing old land deeds, searching for any surviving relatives of Neumann who might shed light on the motivations behind his secret projects. The archivist found partial clues, a mention of Neumann possibly traveling to New York in 1885, and an unverified rumor he had been seen in Chicago a few years later. But the trail grew cold, as if he had vanished into the throngs of Gilded Age America. The deeper they delved, the more elusive the truth became. While this intellectual treasure hunt continued, Miguel found himself in the unusual role of local celebrity. Town gossip flourished, painting him as a quiet hero who stumbled upon a goldmine of knowledge. Whenever curiosity seekers loitered at the ranch gates, he was the face they hoped to glimpse. Some offered him money for interviews or inside information, which he politely declined. Others, more brazen, snuck onto the property, forcing Franklin to hire part-time security. The very barn Miguel had known so intimately now felt threatened by prying eyes. Caught in the crossfire was the daily ranch work that wouldn't simply vanish. One afternoon, an irrigation line broke, flooding a pasture, and Miguel spent hours knee-deep in muddy water trying to patch it. Another day, a storm system threatened a hail of the size that could devastate the crops, prompting everyone to scramble for preventive measures. Life on the ranch continued, a never-ending cycle that cared little for hidden laboratories or potential historical fame. Yet, at each pause in chores, the discovery's weight pressed on everyone's mind. Amid the chaotic swirl, Franklin realized the ranch was at a financial tipping point. Modernizing equipment and the constant maintenance of such a vast property had strained the budget. Several corporate buyers had lingered around, offering to purchase large sections of the land. Before the discovery, the idea was unimaginable. This was multi-generational land. Now, ironically, the newfound possibility of turning the hidden chamber into a revenue-generating historical attraction seemed like a potential lifeline. If managed well, the site could be a magnet for tourism and academic grants. perhaps allowing Golden Prairie Ranch to endure for another generation. Still, Franklin wrestled with ethical considerations. Should they really convert it into a spectacle? Might that degrade the integrity of Newman's legacy? Professor Carter argued that a controlled, museum-like approach would be best, prioritizing research and preservation. Some staff members whispered that a full-scale theme park might turn the ranch's fortunes around overnight. Miguel, however, feared any approach that relegated the barn and its hidden wonder to a carnival attraction. Quietly, he confided to Franklin his hopes that a middle ground could be found, one that allowed the broader world to learn from Neumann's foresight while respecting the solemn aura of the place that had nurtured the secret for so long. As the days stretched into weeks, the basement yielded more clues, each discovery adding a piece to the puzzle, but also introducing new questions. Sketches hinted at advanced battery designs, replete with chemical formulas that baffled the graduate student. Maps indicated corresponding facilities in other states, though no details were given. And on one large blueprint, tucked away behind an old trunk, someone had scrawled in bold letters, "Not yet time," a cryptic warning, or maybe just a cautious note from a visionary man who believed the world was not ready for what he had to offer. One cool morning, as the last vestiges of summer began to fade, Miguel arrived at the barn for his usual chores, only to find Professor Carter's graduate student, Kayla, sitting on a wooden stool outside the barn, looking distraught. She explained that she had been working late in the chamber the night before, scanning some diaries when she stumbled on references to a Des Moines consortium that might link Newman's operation to other secret labs. In her excitement, she forgot the time. By the time she emerged, the padlock to the barn doors had been tampered with, as if someone had tried to break in. Though Kayla was fine, the incident rattled everyone. It seemed that knowledge of the discovery had spread far enough to attract nefarious interest. Franklin stepped up ranch security, but the tension was palpable. If corporate buyers or unscrupulous collectors got wind of advanced 19th century technology, it might lead to a frenzy of attempts to seize or sabotage the site. Professor Carter insisted on installing a secure storage area in the underground chamber for the most sensitive documents, though some staff worried this could damage the items or disrupt the pristine conditions that had preserved them so well. Miguel, for his part, felt a growing responsibility to guard the place like a sentinel. This wasn't just a trove of historical artifacts. It was the crowning achievement of someone's life's work, someone who might have had big dreams for America's future. Amid these troubles, an unexpected visitor showed up one afternoon, a man named Donovan Riley, presenting himself as an independent researcher with ties to the Smithsonian. He wore a sharply tailored suit, far out of place in rural South Dakota, and spoke in polished tones that made Franklin's hackles rise. Riley had heard whispers about extraordinary artifacts and offered a well-financed plan to move them to a controlled facility in Washington, D.C. In exchange, he dangled potential perks, federal grants for the ranch, personal compensation for the owners, and extensive publicity. Professor Carter and Miguel immediately bristled. They knew that once the artifacts left the barn, local oversight would vanish. Riley's smooth talk about furthering national knowledge rang hollow, especially when he glossed over the question of whether Prairieville or Golden Prairie Ranch would retain any rights. Franklin politely but firmly declined to hand over the artifacts. Riley left without protest, but his parted words, "You'll come around eventually," lingered like a threat in the corridors of everyone's mind. In the following days, there were hushed conversations between Carter's team and Franklin on how best to protect the site. Some argued for quietly transferring the critical documents to a local museum vault until the dust settled. Others felt any movement would tip off potential thieves. Miguel, generally silent during such debates, finally voiced his opinion. Neumann wanted this to stay hidden until the right time. Now that we found it, we owe it to him and future generations to keep it accessible, but safe. We shouldn't scatter it into a dozen faraway vaults. It was in that meeting that a consensus formed. The ranch would continue working with Carter's team to meticulously document, preserve, and eventually create a small on-site facility. Scholars could visit by appointment, and the local government would be invited to help protect it as a state historical treasure. The approach, though cautious, balanced the competing demands of scholarly access preservation, and community benefit. Yet, no plan could fully erase the underlying anxiety that someone with deeper pockets or hidden agendas might force the issue. As early autumn nights set in, the ranch's transformation became more visible. A small convoy of visiting academics was now a common sight. Portable buildings were erected behind the barn to serve as temporary research labs. A generator hummed day and night, powering computer equipment that meticulously cataloged each discovered artifact. The local news station finally got wind of a major historical find, but was kept at bay by Franklin's careful refusal to grant interviews. Rumors swirled that the site could spark an entire wave of historical tourism for Prairieville, a boon for the struggling rural economy. Miguel hovered at the edge of it all, feeling both proud and protective. In stolen moments when the barn was quiet, he would descend into the chamber to revisit certain items that intrigued him. A locked wooden chest labeled Newman's personal documents drew his attention one evening. Carefully, he pried it open with Carter's permission, revealing notebooks and diaries wrapped in cloth. The diaries were scrawled, mostly in German, but bits of English peppered the pages. Miguel's eyes caught on a phrase in shaky English handwriting. Must ensure the future is worthy. Flipping through the pages, he found sketches of farmland, windmill designs, references to ways of harnessing the plains' energy. He lingered over a penciled drawing of the barn itself, meticulously labeled beams and footings, each with a note about resonant frequencies or structural synergy. It struck Miguel that Neumann viewed the barn not just as a building, but as a kind of engineered shell housing technology that might have been too advanced for its era. One entry in particular caught his heart. I trust the land itself. If we labor with respect, it will keep our secrets until the world is ready. He pressed a palm against the barn wall, as if hoping to feel the pulse of Neumann's spirit in the hush of that underground world. Miguel found himself reflecting on how the ranch had kept its secrets so long, how he, too, had stayed largely invisible. Perhaps he and Neumann shared a certain kinship, two men who poured their lives into the soil, overshadowed by others' ambitions and the relentless tide of modern progress. When he finally reemerged upstairs, the day was turning to twilight, and Franklin was waiting near the horses' stalls. "Everything okay?" Franklin asked, noticing the pensive look on Miguel's face. Miguel let out a long sigh. "I just keep thinking about what Neumann sacrificed. All this brilliance." And he hid it away. "We have a chance to let the world see it, but also a responsibility to handle it right." Franklin nodded, his eyes heavy with understanding. "You're not the only one who feels that weight." Meanwhile, Professor Carter reported that her team had uncovered evidence of a network letters referencing possible sister facilities in Colorado, Iowa, and other frontier states. The diaries hinted that Neumann was part of a consortium of similarly minded inventors scattered across the still-developing nation, each hiding advanced ideas until they felt the nation was capable of using them responsibly. Some letters carried cryptic remarks about avoiding the mistakes of empire and not repeating Europe's hubris. The scope was mind-boggling, suggesting that Golden Prairie Ranch might be just one node in a web of hidden technological experiments. Yet, the diaries also indicated a sense of urgency in Neumann's final entries, an anxiety that the secret might be uncovered prematurely by interests that would corrupt or militarize the technology. His last known writing ended abruptly with the words, "Time must judge us." Miguel found it haunting, as if Neumann had sensed he wouldn't be there to guide future generations himself. More than ever, Miguel felt that he, along with the ranch community, had inherited not just objects, but a promise, a mission to safeguard knowledge until it could be rightfully used. As the ranch community grappled with these revelations, the local economy began to shift. Curiosity lured visitors to Prairieville, filling up the single motel on Main Street. A wave of new small businesses, coffee shops, antique stores bloomed seemingly overnight, hoping to catch the influx of academics and enthusiasts. The mayor, Susan Yates, proposed a heritage festival to celebrate the region's frontier past, hinting that an official unveiling of Neumann's underground chamber could be the festival's highlight. Franklin hesitated, worried that such an event might lead to crowd control issues and potential damage to the site. Some longtime residents viewed the changes warily. One afternoon, an elderly neighbor visited Miguel at his trailer, complaining about the circus forming around the barn. She recalled quieter times when nobody cared about old boards and hidden basements. Miguel empathized. The ranch was losing the serene, timeless quality he'd once cherished. But he also believed that harnessing some of the new attention could save the ranch from financial ruin. The hidden chamber Newman's legacy had become their best chance to secure a stable future. A certain shift in Franklin's demeanor took place in those days. He spent fewer hours on typical ranch business and more time on phone calls with legal firms and potential sponsors. On a cool October morning, he pulled Miguel aside to share news. A major university from out of state wanted to partner with them, offering a multi-million-dollar endowment to fund the ranch's transformation into a research center. The catch: the university insisted on partial ownership of the artifacts and the right to remove any pieces they deemed important for their own labs. Miguel tensed at the thought. That means they'd effectively control what gets studied and when. It could all leave the ranch in sealed crates, he said grimly. Franklin acknowledged the concern but noted that the endowment could solve the ranch's money woes for decades. Think of it this way, Franklin reasoned. We could modernize everything. We'd be financially secure. You'd get top-notch medical coverage for life. Despite the temptation, Miguel's gut reaction was that such a partnership would compromise Newman's vision. He'd seen how quickly knowledge can be exploited once it's removed from its context. Maybe that was exactly what Newman feared. The diaries suggested a desire for future stewardship, not commodification. Still, the appeal of relieving his own financial burden, finally getting top-level care for his arthritis, hovered like a mirage. Professor Carter, when apprised of the offer, looked troubled. She recommended a cautious approach, perhaps a smaller-scale collaboration with local universities that would keep the artifacts on site. Yet, the big money from a prestigious institution was alluring, especially to some ranch hands who saw in it a ticket to pay raises and job security. Thus, the seeds of an internal split began to sprout. Some believed a generous partnership was the only realistic way forward, while others saw it as selling out the ranch's soul. In the midst of this debate, the hidden chamber remained a silent participant. Day after day, Carter's team translated more diaries, uncovering references to advanced irrigation techniques, pre-electric lighting methods, and theories about mechanical computing. Each breakthrough reaffirmed that what lay beneath the barn was no mere novelty. It held implications that could rewrite textbooks on technological progress. For Miguel, each new discovery strengthened his resolve that these artifacts must remain accessible to genuine researchers and the local community, not locked away behind a university's corporate facade. The standoff reached its tipping point when a more aggressive player entered the scene: Sheridan Tech, a major defense contractor known for researching emerging technologies. An executive team arrived unannounced one afternoon, stepping out of sleek SUVs onto the ranch's dusty lot. They introduced themselves to Franklin and offered an eye-popping sum for exclusive access to all mechanical and scientific designs from Newman's hidden lab. Their argument was that early prototypes, especially those hinting at wireless communication and power generation, could hold groundbreaking military applications. Miguel was leading a horse from one corral to another when he saw the men in suits. His stomach knotted with worry. Defense contracts, top-secret labs, government security clearances. It sounded like the kind of scenario that would bury Newman's work under layers of confidentiality. He hurried to find Franklin and Carter, only to learn they were already in a tense negotiation with Sheridan Tech reps. The conversation ended with Franklin politely, but firmly, rejecting their offer. The men left, but not before leaving behind thick informational packets that hinted at continuing negotiations. That evening, Franklin, Miguel, and Carter gathered in the main house's study, the place that had become a de facto command center since the discovery. Franklin looked pale and exhausted, nursing a headache. They basically offered enough money to pay off every debt this ranch has, and then some, he explained. But they also want complete control over how, when, and if the research ever becomes public. Carter's face hardened. That would be the exact opposite of what a historian hopes for. It would turn this find into a classified resource, locked away in a military vault. That defeats the entire purpose of preserving knowledge for the public good. Miguel, ever the realist, expressed his fear that continued refusals might provoke more direct tactics. What if they decide to sue or petition the government to seize the site under some eminent domain clause? If they see a national defense angle, they might try anything. The quiet ring of truth in his words unsettled them all. Nonetheless, they concluded that caving into that kind of pressure would betray not just Noman's vision, but also the promise they'd made to share the knowledge responsibly. Franklin stated plainly, "I'd rather sell off some outer acres for farmland than let them turn this into a secret weapons lab." That sentiment offered some comfort, but the weight of future battles pressed heavily on everyone's mind. The next few days witnessed a surge in local support. Word had spread about unscrupulous corporate buyers circling the ranch like hawks, and Prairieville's residents rallied. Farmers, shopkeepers, and even the local pastor offered their backing. They saw in the discovery a chance to revitalizing the region with cultural tourism and educational programs, not overshadowed by corporate or military greed. A local fundraiser was organized to help finance better security around the barn, and donations poured in small amounts from many people. But it added up. Meanwhile, Carter's team worked tirelessly, digitizing as many documents as they could, just in case something forced them to relinquish physical artifacts. "If we lose the originals," she said, "at least we'll have the digital scans for historians." This precaution loomed over everyone like an admission that they might not win in the long run. Yet it was also an act of defiance, ensuring that Neumann's knowledge would remain out in the world, not locked behind a barbed wire perimeter. For Miguel, the entire saga felt like a moral test. He had discovered the trapdoor on a routine day, never anticipating the avalanche of consequences. Now he was entangled in a struggle far larger than his personal life. His arthritic knees still throbbed, and the financial strain hadn't vanished. But he sensed that something bigger than his own survival was at stake, the principle that knowledge, especially the kind that could elevate humanity, belonged to the broader world. Winter's first chill swept across the Golden Prairie Ranch, dusting the tall grass with frost and turning the morning sky a steely gray. Months had passed since Miguel Ortiz first uncovered the trapdoor, and the ranch had transformed in ways no one could have imagined. Security cameras now dotted the property, discreetly monitoring for intruders. A new wave of academics arrived, their breath visible in the cold air as they inspected the final crates of artifacts. Neumann's diaries, meticulously translated, were close to full compilation into a bound volume, an effort spearheaded by Professor Carter's archivist. On a blustery afternoon, the tension that had been simmering finally found a measured resolution. Franklin Hewitt called everyone to a meeting in the newly built research annex behind the barn, a simple, heated structure, housing desks, computers, and scanners. Gathered there were the ranch's core staff, Carter's research team, a few trusted locals, and even the mayor. Franklin cleared his throat, looking around at the circle of determined faces, then laid out the plan he had developed with legal counsel. The Golden Prairie Ranch would form a nonprofit foundation dedicated to preserving and studying Neumann's hidden chamber. The foundation's board would include local community leaders, academics, and, crucially, Miguel Ortiz as the original discoverer. "You've been here longer than anyone." "Miguel," Franklin said, meeting his gaze, "you know this place better than any of us, and we owe you for finding it." A hush descended on the room. Miguel swallowed hard, overcome by a flurry of emotions. For so long, he had been the silent workhorse, overshadowed by the ranch's legacy. Now he'd be entrusted with guiding that legacy into the future. More than that, the Foundation's bylaws would require that all major decisions about the artifacts remain transparent and dedicated to public educational benefit. The potential for profit remained visitors, tours, research grants, but it would be steered into preserving the site and supporting the local community, rather than lining corporate pockets. The mayor voiced her approval, pointing out how this arrangement could transform Prairieville into a research and heritage destination, creating jobs and pride in local history. Professor Carter nodded enthusiastically. Her team stood ready to serve as academic advisors, ensuring Newman's discoveries reached the broader, scholarly world. Even some of the ranch hands who'd been uneasy about losing farmland to gawking tourists seemed mollified by the notion that the site would be approached with respect, not commercial exploitation. Miguel, blinking back a bit of tears both from gratitude and lingering anxiety, agreed to serve on the board. In a hushed voice, he thanked everyone for the trust they had shown him. He also expressed a hope that the foundation would keep striving to learn more about Newman's motivations, uncover any sister sites, and glean knowledge that might help solve modern problems like sustainable energy or advanced communication in rural areas. As the meeting concluded, a sense of relief mixed with excitement coursed through the group. They knew this was not the end of the journey. Shared in tech or other interests might still challenge them, possibly even mounting legal battles. But at least the ranch had a shield of collective will now, backed by official structures and the moral conviction that knowledge, especially from the past, should guide a better future. That evening, with the wind howling outside, Miguel lingered in the barn's loft, gazing down at the floor where it all began. The trapdoor was now outfitted with a secure locking system, but otherwise unchanged, the same heavy oak with carved leaves and a brass plate. In that moment, he felt a profound sense of solace. His years of service, the aches in his bones, the quiet nights spent feeling overlooked, none had been in vain. By a twist of fate, he had become the gatekeeper of a lost man's visionary dreams. Newman's final words in those diaries still echoed, "Time must judge us." And perhaps, in a way, time had. The era was finally ready, and so was Miguel Ortiz, an old ranch hand who, by chance and courage, had unearthed a legacy that could reshape what people thought they knew about America's pioneering spirit. From the first unexpected discovery to the breathtaking unveiling of a hidden legacy, this tale proves that true wonder can lie just below our everyday routines. Through the eyes of one dedicated ranch hand, we witness a transformative journey, one that takes him from quiet anonymity to the forefront of a historical revelation with the power to unite an entire community. It's a testament to how dedication, integrity, and a bit of courage can shine a light on truths long buried. As we bring this story to a close, we invite you to share your thoughts and insights. Do you think hidden innovations like these still exist elsewhere? How might they shape our future? Let's keep the conversation going. Comment below with your opinions and ideas, and let's discuss the possibilities together. Thank you for watching and supporting our channel.